Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. We're back with another series, and before we get started, I'm extremely excited to share that the Authority File is now an award-winning podcast. That's right, we were named Best B2B Podcast at the 2023 Publisher Podcast Awards. We'll link to it in the show notes for this episode, and you can also check it out at publisherpodcastawards.com. Many thanks to Media Voices, the producer of the event, for the recognition, and of course to the amazing team here at Choice. In this 4-part series, which is brought to you with support from Sage, I'll be speaking with 4 guests on what seems to be an ever-evolving goal: student success in higher education. We examine the scaffolding that supports it, including how that has changed over the years, the library's role in driving student success, how to partner up across the institution, and finally, we'll look ahead at how we might see the concept evolve even further. Joining me on the program are Ceceilia Parnther, Assistant Professor of Higher Education Leadership and Coordinator of Doctoral Programs at St. John's University; María Evelia Emerson, Student Success Librarian at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign; Amber Eakin, Instructional Librarian at Strayer University; and Andrew Boney, Executive Editor at Sage. In this 4th and final episode, we do some looking ahead and consider which lessons we learned during COVID will likely stay with us and which traditional approaches to student success should be changed or even discarded. So a little while ago, we talked a little bit about the pandemic's influence on the way we initiate student success initiatives, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. So how has the pandemic altered the student success landscape, particularly in ways that are likely to stay with us? What are we taking away from some of these new procedures, I guess, that that have worked, and we're likely to stick with. And Amber, I'll circle back with you to start.
Online learning is not going away.
Yeah.
We have had an opportunity to cultivate our skills in delivering instruction to students wherever they are. This means that students who aren't able to come into a physical space can still interact with what we have to offer, and we can increase our access. So I think that a lot of people talk about getting back to normal, returning to campus, but we are going to leave a lot of students behind if we don't incorporate online services or hybrid services. We have to continue to develop these skills and not think, okay, I'm glad that's over, because it will always be here.
Yep. Maria, how about you?
Yeah, echo everything that Amber just said. I do hear that a lot. Like, we need to return back to the old normal, and it's like, I don't think we should. That was one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that I think people saw more firsthand how inequitable many of our services can be. It wasn't very accessible. I mean, we still struggle with that. But we with workshops in particular, I see this with students, is that they continue to want it to be online. They don't want to come to it in person. And there's some confusion over that from others that I see, like, how do you form a community online? And I don't see why you can't. There's plenty of people who make friends online. They video game with them online. It's just a different way of doing it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong way of doing it. So I think also it brings to light, it's like, not only are these online students, you also have students who are parents. You have students who might not have a car. You have students who have, back-to-back classes, or they have a job they have to get to. So with the workshops being online, I hear it from many students, I can now make this because I don't have to worry about finding a babysitter, or I don't have to worry about getting to class on time. So I think, having things continue to stay online, and obviously have in-person things, that's still important, but we can also have a lot of success with online options as well.
Right. And Cecilia, what have you found?
First of all, Amber and Maria, that was just so well said. I think that students realize now that they have that option. Prior to this, I think that, you know, it was always an exception or an alternate choice, or you went to pursue online education because you had to go to a specific institution who well versed in being able to help us with those experiences.
Hmm.
And that just isn't the case anymore.
Right.
And so because of that, I think students expect us to do that well. And when we don't do it well, and when we don't put in the work around building community, the work around seeing these online interactions as valuable as just as valuable, then the students feel it and they're disengaged. And so I think that their I can't believe I'm going to say this, and I'm sorry in advance, but their consumer patterns, they expect more from us in the online space. They also expect a bit of authenticity. A lot of our schools, we have our mission, we have our branding and our values, but they want to see that lived out online.
Mm.
Um, I also think that this has, again, just opened up our differences in enrollment patterns, coupled with online education, coupled with the fact that tuition is high and inflation exists. Folks want to experience something that they believe is a value and also that they feel is valuable. And that means that there has been an increase in the need, but also an increase in an expectation of responsiveness to show that we value their being here.
Absolutely. And then, Andrew, obviously, I wanted to come back to you on this as well. You know, I guess from your perspective, what from the last 3 years, what has changed, and maybe in the way you deliver content or accessibility, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that everything that has been said is really relevant and something that we as publishers are trying to respond to. And I think a big part of it is um, meeting the expectations of students now who are doing everything digitally and who
Mm.
may be doing every piece of their research on their phone, never touching even a tablet. So how are we as publishers of digital content breaking down the barriers to discovery of that content, but also accessibility and authentication for students to access resources that their institutions purchase or subscribe to? And that's not something that publishers have always done well. And it doesn't serve us at all when students have so many options for information to hit that firewall of a
Hmm.
publisher's content that they actually should have access to. And that's something that certainly we've been trying to improve at Sage, and I know at a number of other publishers, because it just doesn't do us any favors, and it certainly doesn't do students any favors. So I do think that those issues around access are really key to getting our resources in front of students who are consuming information in a very different way now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that plays into what Cecilia said. I don't think there's any shame in that at all in terms of that consumer experience online. We've all become very used to, or we've all developed expectations around online technology and experience around that, and expect it to be the same across whatever interface we're interacting with at any time. So yeah, that's an excellent point. Also, what are some of what might be considered traditional quote unquote approaches to student success that could stand some updating or changing or even being discarded? And um, last time we talked, Amber, you mentioned one shots, and I'd like to kind of get your take on that to start.
Can we please discard the idea, the myth of a one shot session? We cannot fit everything into a 30 or 60-minute session in a meaningful way. This is fitting 10 pounds of content into a 5-pound bag. We're either going to overload students so that they don't remember anything once we leave the room, or we're going to overlook critical resources to support a population. In my experience, it can be helpful to create learning objectives for different session types and then ask faculty members what they need. So, if we're thinking about a first year course, a library orientation might be appropriate to teach them how to get to the library, how to access it, and where to find help. Very basic introduction. But if we're thinking about students in their second or third year, hopefully they already know that we exist and how to get to us. So they could benefit more from assignment specific sessions where we walk them through the assignment prompts, help them select keywords, and conduct a search in real time. Now, faculty members may be a little skeptical about this approach. I'm going to call Cecilia in on this one. But in my experience, they do warm to the idea pretty quickly once they see the results. This also means that they are inviting us back into their classes multiple times across the term, and that allows us to scaffold the instruction. Cecilia also noted doing check ins with the students to make sure that we're not going too quickly or too slowly, and we can use that approach as well in scaffolding it. It aligns with Malcolm Knowles' assumptions of andragogy, specifically that adult learners want information to solve a problem.
Hmm.
So I like when I have the opportunity to provide just in time library instruction, like how to complete an assignment, rather than just in case, which is what our traditional one shot or library overview might be. And what I particularly love, and I got to experience this a couple of times this week, I love seeing students come back to library webinars term after term because they know that we're going to have something new for them every time.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Cecilia, anything you want to respond to?
Amber's exactly right. She's absolutely right. The thing that there's so many things that we have the opportunity to refine with the new needs of our students. And let me take a step back and say they aren't necessarily new needs. They are needs that have gone unresponded to. And now we are at this point where they can no longer be ignored
Mm-hmm.
for a number of different reasons. And it's a great opportunity to look at some of those. So with that comes a need to reconsider assessment in some ways, and the library is a huge part of that, because if we're bringing in these resources and these experts as partners, and we're able to align our learning objectives with actual skills that students can learn, refine, and demonstrate based on learning outcome, now we have shown them something that will last for future courses, but they also have gained the confidence like in context.
Mm-hmm.
And the library has the resources for us to capture what some of those direct skills are that I wouldn't necessarily know. If the peer reviewed article example was such a great one, because of course you recognize that in research as this very specific empirical standard. I want to be challenged on the ways that we can gather information, and then we decide together where the appropriate place for that information is to go. I would just also offer, in terms of things that we can refine, is just that focus on student responsiveness. I think some of the frustration and disconnect has come because we are listening to students, but we're not necessarily doing the work that requires us to say, well, perhaps that means that something on my end needs to change, and that's okay.
Mm.
instead of seeing these two things at odds. And I don't think that they have to be. And so there's this internal conflict because you feel like you're doing the best that you can because you've set up these expectations and this is how you learned and this is how other students have learned. These are not other students. These are students who are experiencing things, are challenged by things, and continue to go into a future that looks markedly different than many of our former students. And as with everything else, we need to be responsive. Someone mentioned the tech advancement,
Mm.
and I remember waiting for the sound of America Online to connect to the internet, right?
Mhm.
And you had to be patient because sometimes you were just going to wait and you sat there and you waited. And now, if I look at my Wi Fi bar and all of a sudden I'm down to 2 or 1, it's just like ridiculous because I don't have 100% connectivity immediately.
Right.
This is what's happening for our students.
Mhm.
And if we can't figure out how to be expansive enough to recognize what they need, as is our job requirement, as is my requirement as a faculty member, but also recognize that their reception of it requires me to teach it differently or offer them opportunities to gain the access differently, then neither of us will meet our goals. And so it's a lot of the sitting and listening and taking in and reflecting on what we're hearing and making adjustments accordingly.
Yeah. Excellent. Andrew, I wanted to come over to you as well for this. I mean, as a publisher, I mean, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but in this context, I guess you have to be also responsive and very aware of how things are evolving and changing.
Sure, and I'd like to go back to Amber's just in time
Mm.
instruction and think about how our resources are used in a just in time fashion, and thinking about the range of use cases that our resources might be serving, and how do we structure them. So how do we structure a piece of text in a way that is going to support both deep learning, but also a student who needs to come in, has 5 minutes to look at something, has a very specific interest, and are able to find what they need and leave. And what does that look like in terms of the technology that we're using in the organization of the content, and uh, also with the sense that, in some uses, a student wants a low stake engagement and a low stake assessment, that maybe what they want is encouragement and affirmation that they have learned something very specific. And those are also things that we can do through functionality that we include with the content that we publish. But it is a challenge for us to find that balance and find partners to help us create that material.
Mm.
So it's kind of a tall order, and something that we've definitely been working through, particularly since and through the pandemic, as we've been trying to remain as flexible as we can in the way that we deliver digital content.
Right. Right. Excellent. And then Maria, I wanted to make sure anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think I agree with what everyone's been saying, and then also looking at these traditional student success skills, and I think putting a spin on it is important. So it's not even necessarily taking away anything,
Mm.
but adding to it. So the first example that came to my mind is one of our more popular workshops is study skills for neurodiverse students. Students love it, and it's taking these study skills that they're told over and over again, like highlighting lists and color coding and memorizing. It's not working for them because their brain works differently than what is typically being taught. So showing them these other skills that they could use, and building upon those strengths has been really great for them, and they've really appreciated learning about it. So I think taking these services that we've done for years and acknowledging that there are different ways to approach something, and that one's not worse than the other. they're just, everyone has different ways of approaching things, and to acknowledge that and support it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Cecilia, Amber, Maria, and Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. You just heard from Ceceilia Parnther, Assistant Professor of Higher Education Leadership and Coordinator of Doctoral Programs at St. John's University, María Evelia Emerson, Student Success Librarian at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Amber Eakin, Instructional Librarian at Strayer University, and Andrew Boney, Executive Editor at Sage. This series is brought to you with support from Sage. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's Advertising Director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.